The moment Ethan walked into the restaurant, everything already felt wrong. The kind of wrong that makes your chest tighten before your brain can explain it. And then he saw her, sitting by the window, calm, composed, dressed like someone who owned the entire city. But that was not what froze him. It was what stood beside her, 3 identical toddlers, all staring directly at him, all holding tiny juice boxes, all completely silent, as if they had been waiting, specifically, for him. He stopped, mid-step, hands still on the back of a chair, wondering if he had walked into the wrong place, wrong date, wrong life. But the hostess smiled awkwardly and said, "Table for Ethan, right?" And suddenly there was no escape. The woman stood up, confident, almost amused, and extended her hand. "You must be Ethan." Her voice smooth, controlled, but her eyes sharp, measuring, and behind her, the 3 kids shifted slightly, still staring. Ethan forced a polite smile, shook her hand. "Claire?" She nodded. "Claire," then gestured casually to the children. "And these are mine," as if she had just introduced a handbag, not 3 human beings who looked like carbon copies of each other. Ethan blinked once, then twice, trying to process. "I didn't know you had kids," his voice careful, not accusing, just confused, but Claire tilted her head slightly. "Does that change anything?" And the question hit harder than expected. Before he could answer, one of the toddlers tugged her sleeve, whispering something, and she leaned down, listening briefly before nodding, then straightened again. "They wanted to come," she added, like it was the most normal thing in the world to bring triplets to a blind date. Ethan let out a small breath, pulling out his chair slowly. "Right, okay." But his mind was already racing, because this was not just unexpected, it was deliberate. There was intent behind this, something calculated, something he could not yet see. As he sat, one of the kids climbed onto the chair across from him without asking. Another leaned against the table, and the third simply stood there, eyes locked on him, studying him in a way no child should. Claire watched all of it without intervening, almost as if she was waiting for his reaction, testing him. "So," she said, sitting down gracefully, "tell me about you." And the normalcy of the question clashed violently with the chaos in front of him. Ethan hesitated, then gave a short, practiced answer. "I run a small construction business, nothing fancy." But his attention kept drifting back to the children, their identical faces, their eerie silence, their focus entirely on him. "And you?" he asked, though he already had a feeling, and she didn't disappoint. "I am the CEO of a logistics company," she replied casually, like it meant nothing, but it explained everything about her presence, her control, her confidence. Ethan nodded slowly, but before he could respond, one of the toddlers suddenly spoke, clear and direct. "Why did you leave your son?" And the words landed like a punch to the chest. Everything froze, the air, the noise. Even Claire's expression flickered for just a second before returning to neutral. Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs, his fingers tightening around the edge of the table, because that was not information you could guess, not something a child would randomly ask, not something anyone here should know. He looked at Claire, searching for an explanation, but she only leaned back slightly, watching him even more closely now, and said quietly, "Well, go on." Ethan answered him. And in that moment, Ethan realized this was never just a blind date. This was something else entirely, something far more dangerous, and he had already walked straight into it. Ethan's throat went dry, every instinct screaming to stand up and walk away. But his body refused to move, locked in place by the weight of that question, by the way those 3 identical faces stared at him like they already knew the answer. He forced a breath, slow, controlled, his voice lower now, tighter. "Who told you that?" The child did not blink, did not hesitate, just repeated softly, "Why did you leave your son?" And this time it felt sharper, more precise, like a blade sliding between his ribs. Ethan's eyes snapped back to Claire, searching for any crack in her calm, any sign this was a joke gone too far. But she simply folded her hands on the table, watching him with unsettling patience. "It is a simple question," she said, her tone neutral, almost clinical. "You can answer it, or you can choose not to, but either way, it matters." Ethan let out a short, humorless laugh, shaking his head. "No, it does not just matter. It is not even appropriate." But even as he said it, He knew he sounded defensive, and that only made the tension worse. One of the other toddlers climbed onto the chair beside him now. Leaning closer, their small voice barely above a whisper, "He cried for you." And Ethan flinched, a visible, uncontrollable reaction that he could not hide. His hand clenched into a fist under the table, his pulse racing. Because this was not random, this was not coincidence, this was targeted. "Enough," he said. Suddenly, louder than intended, drawing a few glances from nearby tables. But Claire did not react, did not apologize, did not correct the children. She simply tilted her head slightly, studying him like a problem she was close to solving. "You are uncomfortable," she observed calmly. "That is interesting." And something about the way she said it made Ethan's stomach twist. "Interesting?" he repeated, incredulous. "You bring 3 kids to a blind date and have them interrogate me about something deeply personal, and that is interesting?" Claire leaned forward just a fraction, her voice lowering. "What is interesting is not the question, Ethan. It is your reaction to it." And for a second, there was a flicker of something else in her eyes, something sharper, something almost accusatory. Ethan shook his head, pushing his chair back slightly. "I do not know what this is, but I am not playing along," he muttered, starting to stand. But before he could fully rise, the third child, the quietest one, the one who had not spoken yet, suddenly placed a small hand on his arm, stopping him with surprising firmness. Ethan froze, looking down, and the child finally spoke, voice soft but steady. "He still waits by the door every night." And that was it. That was the moment everything inside Ethan cracked just enough to let something real slip through. His breath hitched, his gaze dropping, the anger draining just enough to reveal something underneath, something heavier, something unresolved. "You do not get to say that," he whispered, more to himself than to them. But Claire heard it. Of course she did. She heard everything. "Then tell us why it is not true," she said quietly, no longer casual, no longer detached. And now there was pressure behind her words, a push that made it impossible to stay neutral. Ethan swallowed hard, his mind racing, trying to piece together how she knew, why she knew, what this was really about. And then a thought hit him, sudden and cold, and he looked up at her sharply. "Who are you?" The question hung in the air, heavy, dangerous, and for the first time since he had arrived, Claire did not answer immediately. Instead, she leaned back slowly, her gaze never leaving his, and a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips as she said, "I think the better question is, who do you think I am?" And in that exact moment, Ethan realized he might already know the answer, and it terrified him. Ethan's chest tightened as the realization crept in, slow but undeniable, like a shadow stretching across his mind. He stared at Claire, really stared now, not at the polished surface she presented but at the details beneath it. The way her fingers tapped once against the table, controlled but not entirely relaxed. The way her eyes held his with a familiarity that did not belong between strangers. "No," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head as if that alone could push the thought away. "That is not possible." But even as he said it, the pieces were already aligning, cruelly precise. Claire watched him carefully, her expression unreadable, but there was something there now, something less detached, something closer to expectation. "Say it," she said quietly, almost gently, and that softness made it worse, made it heavier. Ethan swallowed hard, his voice rough. "You knew her," he said finally, each word dragged out like it hurt to release it. "You knew Lily." And the name alone hit him like a punch, memories flashing uninvited, a small hand in his, laughter in a quiet apartment, promises he had not kept. One of the children shifted at the sound of the name, their eyes flickering toward Claire before returning to him, and that tiny reaction confirmed everything. Claire did not deny it, did not correct him. She simply nodded once, slow and deliberate. "I did not just know her," she replied, her voice steady but no longer distant. "I was there when she needed someone, when you were not." And the accusation landed harder than anything the children had said. Ethan's jaw tightened, his gaze dropping to the table, because he had no immediate defense, no clean explanation that did not sound like an excuse. "You do not understand what happened," he said after a moment. But even to his own ears, it sounded weak, hollow. "Then explain it." Claire pressed, leaning forward slightly now, the calm replaced by something sharper, something more personal. Explain why a father disappears and leaves his child waiting by a door every night. And the words echoed painfully, too close to what he had tried so hard not to picture. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, exhaling shakily. It was not like that, he insisted, but his voice cracked just enough to betray him. One of the toddlers spoke again, softer this time, almost curious. Then what was it like? And that question, simple and direct, stripped away the last of his defenses. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, as if bracing himself, then opened them again, meeting Claire's gaze with something raw, something unguarded. I lost everything, he said, the words coming faster now, pushed out by the pressure building inside him. My business collapsed. I was drowning in debt. I was barely holding it together, and I thought leaving was the only way to protect him from all of it. He paused, his breath uneven. I thought I was buying time, that I would come back when I had fixed things. And there it was, the truth he had buried, flawed and incomplete but real. Claire's expression shifted, just slightly, not softening but changing, recalibrating, as if she was measuring this new version of him against something she already knew. And did you? She asked quietly. Did you fix things? Ethan hesitated, the answer sitting heavy in his chest, because the truth was complicated, because time had stretched longer than he had ever intended, because guilt had turned into distance, and distance into silence. Not fast enough, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper, and that was when the third child, the quiet one, looked at him with something that was not accusation, not curiosity, but something far more unsettling, something like recognition, and said softly, he stopped asking about you. And the words hit harder than anything before, because that meant the waiting had ended, not with reunion, but with acceptance, and that was something Ethan did not know how to face. He looked up at Claire again, desperation creeping in now. Where is he? He asked suddenly, urgently, the question bursting out before he could stop it. Is he okay? And for the first time, Claire did not answer immediately, her gaze lingering on him, searching, weighing, and then she leaned back slowly, her voice calm but carrying a weight that made his stomach drop. That depends, she said, and the slight pause that followed felt endless, suffocating. On what you are willing to do next. The words hung in the air like a threat disguised as an offer, and Ethan felt his pulse spike instantly, his entire body leaning forward without realizing it. What does that mean? He demanded, his voice low but urgent, because whatever game this was, it had just crossed into something far more serious. Claire did not flinch, did not rush. She simply reached for one of the children's juice boxes, adjusting the straw absent-mindedly before answering, as if controlling the pace of the moment. It means, she said calmly, that you do not get to walk back into his life just because you finally feel ready. And the quiet firmness in her tone made it clear this was not negotiable. Ethan clenched his jaw, frustration and fear colliding inside him. I am not asking for permission, he shot back. But even as he said it, the confidence was gone, replaced by something rawer, more desperate. I just need to know where he is. And that was the truth, stripped down to its core. One of the toddlers tilted their heads slightly, watching him closely, almost studying the cracks forming in his composure, while another swung their legs under the table, completely at ease, as if this tension was normal to them. Claire leaned forward now, her eyes locking onto his with a precision that felt almost surgical. You left a child who depended on you, she said, each word deliberate. Do you understand what that does to someone? Ethan inhaled sharply, his first instinct to defend himself rising again, but it faltered halfway, because deep down, he did understand, he just had not allowed himself to sit with it until now. I thought I was protecting him, he said again, weaker this time, as if repeating it might make it more true, but Claire shook her head slightly, not dismissive, just certain. You were protecting yourself, she corrected, and the accuracy of it hit harder than any accusation. Silence fell for a brief moment, heavy and suffocating, broken only when the quiet child spoke again, their voice soft but piercing. He does not call you dad anymore. And that sentence alone nearly knocked the breath out of Ethan's lungs. His hand gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles whitening, because that was something he had never prepared for, never even considered that his absence had not just created distance, it had replaced him entirely. "Stop," he whispered, but there was no strength in it, no authority. Just a plea. Claire watched him closely, and for a split second, something flickered across her face. Not sympathy, not yet, but something less rigid than before. "Then prove them wrong," she said quietly. And now there was a shift, subtle but undeniable. The conversation turning from accusation to challenge. Ethan looked up, confusion mixing with urgency. "What are you talking about?" Claire exhaled slowly, then straightened in her seat, her tone changing, still calm, but now carrying weight, structure, intention. "You want to see him?" she asked, and Ethan nodded immediately, without hesitation. Yes. The answer automatic, almost instinctive. Claire held his gaze for a second longer, then reached into her bag and placed a small envelope on the table between them, sliding it toward him with 2 fingers, slow, deliberate, as if the object itself mattered. Ethan stared at it, his heart pounding again, a different kind of tension building now. "What is this?" he asked cautiously. Claire's voice dropped just slightly, enough to make the moment feel more intimate, more dangerous. "Your chance," she said, and the simplicity of the phrase made it heavier. One of the children leaned closer, eyes bright with something almost like anticipation, while another whispered, barely audible, "Open it." And Ethan hesitated, his hand hovering over the envelope, because every instinct told him that whatever was inside would change everything. He glanced up at Claire one more time, searching for any hint of what he was about to step into, but she only met his gaze steadily, giving nothing away, and that was when Ethan finally picked it up, his fingers tightening around the edge as he slowly began to open it, unaware that the moment he looked inside, there would be no turning back. Ethan's fingers trembled slightly as he pulled the contents from the envelope, his breath shallow, uneven, the world around him fading into a dull blur as everything narrowed down to what he held in his hands. It was a photograph, worn at the edges like it had been handled too many times, and the moment his eyes landed on it, something inside him cracked open completely. A small boy stood in the center of the frame, older than Ethan remembered, taller, thinner, but unmistakable. Those same eyes, that same expression that used to light up when he walked into the room. Except now there was no light, just something distant, something guarded. Ethan's grip tightened involuntarily, his thumb brushing over the image as if he could reach through it. This is recent?" he asked, his voice barely holding together. Claire nodded once, watching him closely, measuring every flicker of emotion that crossed his face. 2 weeks ago," she replied, and that detail alone made his chest tighten even more, because it meant his son was not just a memory frozen in time. He was real, present, growing without him. Ethan swallowed hard, forcing himself to look away from the photo, but his eyes immediately dropped to the second item in his hand, a folded piece of paper, heavier than it should have been, like it carried more than just words. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then unfolded it, his heart pounding louder with each movement. It was not a letter, not in the way he expected. There was no greeting, no explanation, just a single page filled with short lines, handwritten, uneven, like they had been written over time. Not all at once. His eyes scanned the first line, and his breath caught instantly. "Day 12. I waited by the door again. Maybe he is just late." Ethan's vision blurred for a second, but he forced himself to keep reading, each line hitting harder than the last. "Day 27. Mom says he is busy. I think busy means he forgot." His hand started to shake now, the paper trembling visibly, but he could not stop, could not look away. "Day 43. I stopped asking. It makes her sad." That was the line that broke something deeper, something he had kept buried for too long, because it was not anger, not even disappointment. It was resignation, and that was far worse. Ethan exhaled sharply, his chest rising and falling too fast, his mind struggling to process the weight of what he was reading, because this was not just evidence. This was a record, a timeline of absence, of failure, written in the simplest, most honest way possible. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice strained, almost unrecognizable. Claire did not look away, did not soften, but there was something steadier in her tone now, something grounded. "He wrote it," she said, and the confirmation landed like a final blow. One of the toddlers leaned slightly closer, their small voice quiet but clear. He kept it under his pillow, and that detail alone made Ethan's stomach twist painfully. He closed his eyes for a brief second, trying to steady himself, but the images would not stop. The thought of his son lying there, writing those words alone, waiting, hoping, then slowly giving up. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked, almost pleading now, because this felt less like an explanation and more like a test he was already failing. Claire leaned forward again, her presence sharper now, more intentional. "Because this is what you left behind," she said firmly. "Not just a child, but a story he had to write without you." And the clarity of her words left no room for denial. Ethan shook his head slightly, his grip tightening around the paper. "I did not know it was like this," he whispered. But even as he said it, he knew it was not enough, not even close. Claire studied him for a moment longer, then spoke again, her voice quieter but more dangerous than before. "Now you do," she said, and then she paused, just long enough for the weight of that truth to settle completely, before adding, "So the question is, what are you going to do about it?" And this time, there was no escaping it, no deflecting, because the answer would not just determine what happened next, it would determine whether he deserved anything at all. Ethan stared down at the paper for a long moment, his breathing uneven, the noise of the restaurant completely gone now, replaced by the echo of those handwritten lines looping in his mind, each one heavier than the last. His fingers slowly tightened around the page before he folded it carefully, almost reverently, and placed it back on the table as if it were something fragile, something sacred he did not deserve to hold for too long. When he finally looked up, his eyes had changed, the defensiveness stripped away, replaced by something more dangerous, something raw and unresolved. "I am going to fix it," he said, his voice low but firm, not loud, not dramatic, just certain. Claire did not react immediately, her gaze steady, analytical, as if she had heard promises like that before and was waiting to see if this one carried any weight at all. "Fix it," she repeated quietly, leaning back slightly. "Do you even hear how that sounds?" Ethan's jaw tightened, but he did not look away this time. "I know it is not enough," he admitted quickly, the words coming faster now, more honest. "I know I cannot just walk back in and pretend nothing happened. I know I do not deserve that." He paused, his throat tightening briefly before continuing. "But I am not walking away again." And there was something different in that sentence, something grounded, something that did not feel like an excuse. One of the toddlers tilted their head, watching him closely, as if trying to detect whether this version of him was real or just another performance, while another leaned forward slightly, their small voice curious. "How do you know?" And the simplicity of the question forced Ethan to pause, because the truth was, he did not know, not completely, not with certainty, but he lifted his gaze again, meeting Claire's eyes. "I do not," he said honestly, "but I know what happens if I do nothing, and I cannot live with that anymore." And that honesty hung in the air, imperfect but real. Claire studied him for a long second, her expression unreadable, and then something shifted, subtle but unmistakable, not softness, not yet, but a recalibration, as if she was adjusting her expectations based on what she was seeing. "Words are easy," she said finally, her tone calm but carrying weight. "You already proved that once." And the reminder landed hard. But Ethan did not flinch this time, did not look away. "Then do not listen to my words," he replied, his voice steadier now. "Watch what I do." And that was the first time since he sat down that he pushed back, not defensively, but with intention. The children exchanged brief glances, a silent communication passing between them that Ethan could not fully understand. And then the quiet one spoke again, softer than before. "He likes pancakes on Saturdays." And the detail hit Ethan unexpectedly, small but deeply personal, a glimpse into a life he had missed, and something inside him tightened again. But this time it was not just guilt, it was something closer to determination. "Then I will be there on Saturday," he said immediately, almost instinctively, and that was when Claire raised a hand slightly, stopping him before he could go further. "No," she said firmly, and the word cut through the moment like a sharp line, resetting everything. Ethan blinked, confusion flickering across his face. "What do you mean no?" Claire leaned forward again, her gaze locking onto his with renewed intensity. You do not get to choose the terms, she said, each word precise, controlled. You do not get to decide when, how, or even if you see him. And the shift in power was immediate, undeniable. Ethan's expression hardened slightly, frustration rising again. He is my son, he argued. But Claire did not back down, did not soften. And you walked away from that. She replied just as firmly. So now, you earn your way back. And the finality in her voice left no room for argument. Silence fell again, heavier this time, charged with a different kind of tension, not just emotional, but directional, like everything was about to pivot. Ethan exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay grounded, to not react impulsively, because he understood now, at least partially, what this was, not punishment, not entirely, but something closer to a test, a process, a path he would have to follow whether he liked it or not. What do I have to do? He asked finally, his voice quieter but steadier. And this time, Claire did not hesitate. She reached into her bag again, pulling out a second envelope, thicker than the first, placing it on the table with deliberate care, her eyes never leaving his as she said, "Everything starts with that." And the weight of those words made Ethan's stomach tighten again, because whatever was inside this envelope, it was not just another memory, it was a step forward, and possibly the hardest one. Yet, Ethan did not reach for the second envelope immediately. His eyes locked onto it as if it might explode the moment he touched it, his mind already racing ahead, trying to predict what kind of test Claire could possibly design that would measure something as intangible as regret, as commitment, as redemption. The restaurant noise slowly seeped back into his awareness, the clinking of glasses, distant conversations, but it all felt irrelevant compared to the silence pressing down between them. What is in it? He asked finally, his voice controlled but tight, because he needed to understand what he was stepping into before he crossed that line. Claire did not answer right away. Instead, she folded her hands lightly on the table, her posture composed, her gaze unwavering. It is not something you prepare for, she said calmly. It is something you face, and that answer did nothing to ease the tension tightening in his chest. One of the toddlers leaned closer again, their small voice carrying an unsettling certainty. If you do not open it, you cannot see him. And the directness of it snapped something into place inside Ethan, stripping away the hesitation that had been holding him back. His hand moved, slower this time, more deliberate, as if acknowledging the weight of the choice rather than avoiding it. And he picked up the envelope, feeling its thickness, its density, like it held more than paper. He glanced at Claire one last time, searching for any final clue, any warning, but her expression remained steady, unreadable, and that told him everything he needed to know. There would be no guidance, no shortcuts. He slid his finger under the seal and opened it. Inside was not a single document, but several, neatly arranged, structured, intentional. The first page caught his attention immediately. Bold text at the top, clear and unavoidable. Temporary custody agreement. And Ethan's breath caught, his eyes scanning the words faster now, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Legal language, conditions, clauses, timelines, all laid out with precision. What is this? He asked, his voice sharper now. Confusion and disbelief colliding. Claire leaned forward slightly, her tone steady but firm. It is the reality you left behind catching up with you, she said. And then she let the silence sit for just a second before continuing. Lily is gone. And those 3 words hit harder than anything that had come before. Everything inside Ethan froze, his grip on the papers tightening instantly, his mind refusing to process it at first, rejecting it outright. No, he said under his breath, shaking his head. No, that is not. But the certainty in Claire's eyes did not waver, did not soften, and that was when the truth broke through. She passed away 6 months ago. Claire continued quietly, not cruel, not cold, just factual, and the calmness of it made it even more devastating. Ethan's vision blurred again, but this time it was not just emotion, it was shock, a deep, disorienting shock that pulled the ground out from under him completely. Why did no one tell me? He asked, his voice hollow, almost unrecognizable. One of the children answered softly. They tried. And that single line carried an entire story of missed calls, unanswered messages, distances that had grown too wide to cross. Ethan's chest tightened painfully, his thoughts spiraling, trying to rewind time, trying to find the moment where he could have changed something, anything, but it was too late, far too late. Claire watched him carefully, her voice lowering slightly. After she died, your son did not have anyone legally responsible for him, she explained, so I stepped in. And now the pieces aligned fully, the CEO, the control, the precision. This was not random. This was intentional. She had taken responsibility where he had abandoned it. Ethan looked back down at the document, his hands shaking more visibly now, the words blurring together until one line stood out, clear and undeniable. Conditional transfer of custody. You are saying, he began, his voice faltering, that he is not with you permanently. Claire held his gaze, her expression firm. I am saying that right now. I am the only thing standing between him and a system that does not care about him the way he deserves. And that reality hit like a second wave, colder, heavier, more urgent. Ethan's heart pounded, his mind racing, because this was bigger than guilt now, bigger than regret. This was about what came next, what he chose to do when there was no more past to fix, only a future to fight for. In this agreement, he asked, his voice steadier now despite everything, because he needed clarity, needed direction. Claire's answer came without hesitation, sharp and final. It determines whether you become his father again, or just a man he used to wait for. And the weight of that choice settled fully onto Ethan's shoulders, crushing and unavoidable, because now, there was no one else to blame, no one else to hide behind, just him, and what he was willing to do next. Ethan's hands remained on the document long after Claire finished speaking, his eyes fixed on the words but no longer reading them, because the meaning had already sunk in too deep to ignore. Lily was gone, permanently, and there was no version of reality where he could go back and say goodbye, no chance to explain, no chance to fix anything with her. And that absence created a silence inside him that was louder than anything else in the room. He inhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay present. Because this was not about the past anymore. This was about the boy in that photograph, the boy who had waited until he stopped, the boy who might not even want him back. What are the conditions? He asked finally, his voice steadier than he felt. Because if there was a path, no matter how difficult, he needed to see it clearly. Claire nodded once, as if this was the moment she had been waiting for, and gestured lightly toward the pages. Read, she said, and Ethan obeyed, his eyes moving across the document again, this time with focus, absorbing each line, each requirement, each constraint. Weekly supervised visits, mandatory counseling sessions, financial transparency, a stable living environment verified over time, and then one clause that stood out above all the others. Child consent required for permanent custody reinstatement. Ethan's brow tightened, his gaze lifting slightly. He has to agree? He asked, and Claire did not hesitate. Yes, she replied, her tone firm but not unkind. Because this is not about what you want. It is about what he feels safe with, and the fairness of it made it impossible to argue, even if it made everything harder. Ethan nodded slowly, processing, accepting, because this was not a negotiation. This was a reality he had earned. One of the toddlers leaned closer, their small voice softer now, less sharp than before. He does not trust easily. And that simple statement carried more weight than any legal clause on the page. Ethan exhaled quietly, his fingers brushing over the edge of the document, grounding himself in the present moment. I understand, he said, and this time, he meant it in a different way, not just intellectually, but emotionally, because for the first time, he was not thinking about what he had lost, but about what his son had endured. Claire watched him closely, her eyes searching for any sign of hesitation, any crack that would reveal this was temporary. But instead she saw something else, something steadier, something that did not rush to defend or justify, and she leaned back slightly, her voice softer now. This will take time, she said, not as a warning, but as a truth. Weeks, months, maybe longer. And Ethan nodded again, more firmly this time. Then I will take the time, he replied without hesitation, and the simplicity of that answer carried more weight than anything else he had said so far. The children exchanged brief glances again, But this time there was something different in their expressions, something less guarded, something closer to curiosity than judgment. Ethan looked down at the final page, where a signature line waited, blank, expectant, and for a moment, he hesitated, not out of fear, but out of understanding, because signing this was not just an agreement. It was a commitment to face everything he had avoided, every consequence he had created. He reached for the pen Claire had placed beside the document, his grip steady now, and without looking up, he signed his name, the motion deliberate, final. When he finished, he exhaled slowly, placing the pen down, and only then did he lift his gaze to meet Claire's again. For the first time, she did not look at him like a question or a problem to solve, but like something that might actually hold. Good, she said quietly, and there was something in her tone now, something that almost resembled approval, but not fully, not yet. Ethan nodded once, his chest still heavy but different now, more focused, more anchored. When do I see him? He asked, and this time, the question did not carry desperation, but readiness. Claire glanced briefly at the children, then back at him, her expression calm, but carrying a weight that made the moment feel significant. Tomorrow, she said, and Ethan's breath caught slightly, not from shock, but from the reality of how close this suddenly was. But before he could respond, the quiet child spoke again, their voice softer than ever, almost careful. He does not know you are coming. And that single sentence shifted everything once more, because now it was not just about showing up. It was about facing a boy who might look at him like a stranger, and Ethan realized, as the weight of tomorrow settled in, that the hardest part had not even begun yet. The next day arrived faster than Ethan was ready for, and yet not fast enough to quiet the storm inside him. He stood outside a modest house, nothing like the life Claire clearly lived, but something warmer, something lived in, the kind of place where memories lingered in the walls, and for a moment, he could not move, his hand hovering near the door as if an invisible barrier held him back. This was it. No more preparation, no more explanations, just truth. He exhaled slowly and knocked. The sound echoed louder than it should have, and within seconds, the door opened, not by Claire, but by a woman he did not recognize. Older, kind eyes, cautious expression. You must be Ethan, she said softly, and he nodded, his voice catching slightly. Yes, I am. And before he could say anything else, he heard it, footsteps, small, hesitant, stopping just out of view. His heart slammed hard against his chest, because he knew. The woman stepped aside gently, giving him space, and then the boy appeared. Older, just like the photo, but different in ways a picture could never capture, his posture guarded, his eyes searching, not hopeful, not excited, just careful. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs, because this was his son, but also not the boy he remembered. For a second, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching, fragile, until Ethan finally managed, "Hey." A simple word, too small for everything it needed to carry. The boy did not respond right away, his gaze fixed, analyzing, and then quietly, almost cautiously, "Hi." And that was it. The first exchange, small, but real. Ethan swallowed, taking a step forward, but not too close, not yet. I know I do not get to just come back and act like nothing happened," he said, his voice steady but filled with something honest, something unpolished. "I know I hurt you." And the boy's expression flickered slightly at that. A reaction, subtle but there. "I am not here to pretend," Ethan continued. "I am here because I want to try, if you will let me." And that was the truth, simple, direct, with no excuses attached. The boy looked down briefly, his hands shifting, and for a moment, Ethan thought he might walk away. But instead, he asked quietly, "Why now?" And that question, so simple, so fair, landed with weight. Ethan took a breath, steadying himself. "Because I finally understand what it cost you when I left," he said. "And I cannot undo that, but I can choose what I do from here." And there was no guarantee that would be enough, but it was all he had. The boy looked back up at him, searching again, deeper. This time, as if trying to see past the words into something real, and then after a long pause, he said softly, "You missed my birthday." And Ethan's chest tightened, but he nodded, not denying it. "I know." He replied, his voice quieter now. I missed a lot. And that honesty seemed to land differently, not fixing anything, but not pushing the boy away either. Another silence followed, but this one felt less sharp, less fragile. And then, slowly, the boy took a small step closer, not all the way, just enough to close some of the distance. I still like pancakes, he said, almost as if testing something. And Ethan felt something inside him shift, something fragile but alive. Then maybe, we can start there, he answered gently, and this time, the boy did not look away. Behind them, Claire stood quietly, watching, not intervening, her presence steady but no longer controlling, because this moment did not belong to her. It belonged to them. The distance between father and son was still there, still real, but for the first time, it was not empty. It was filled with something else, something small but powerful, the possibility of rebuilding. Ethan did not reach out, did not rush. He simply stayed, present, steady, and after a moment, the boy nodded. Just once, a small gesture, but enough. Sometimes, healing does not begin with forgiveness. It begins with showing up and staying. And maybe that is the question we all have to ask ourselves. Not whether we can undo the past, but whether we are willing to face it and build something better from it. If this story meant something to you, stay with it. Follow the journey. Because sometimes the hardest roads lead to the most human endings.